All right. Welcome to a short presentation on commercial open source software in the cloud and the corresponding intellectual property strategies. My name is Dirk Riele. I'm a professor at computer science at the University of Erlangen, and I specialize in open source software, more specifically commercial open source, and the various ways of how you can build startups using this strategy. I teach this topic at my home institution, University of Erlangen. I also teach it in the Silicon Valley at University of California at Santa Cruz. In fact, I just finished teaching it there last week. So in addition to just researching and teaching it, we actually facilitate commercial open source startups. Usually they come from my research, but the situation in Germany is such that you can carry research well into a Series A using public funding without having to give up any equity, because public funding is a gift. And this is possible not only for my own startups from my research, but it's actually also possible for any reasonable open source project. The key is you cannot yet have incorporated. If you have not yet incorporated, if you're considering going commercial open source, please talk to me. But now, towards our topic. So commercial open source, in my opinion, has these three different parts to it, or three different course patterns. There are the basic service and support firms, which will earn you a good living, but are not usually funded by venture capital. Then you can have open source distributors, where the complexity is in between components. And so open source distributors own what's in between components and make money off that. And then you can have single vendor open source firms, where there is a software vendor who goes to market with an open source strategy and tries to be the single sole vendor providing services and products based on that particular open source software. This is the common case in commercial open source, and it can attract venture capital because it can have outsized returns, those that venture capitalists are looking for. By now, we've seen three generations, or we are in the third generation of these types of companies. The pioneers were just figuring it out. The second wave started in the 2000s when VCs learned that they could disrupt existing enterprise software using the strategy. And now we are facing what I call the current breed here since 2008. These are infrastructure companies mostly, so not business software companies. And the distinguishing factor is that they are moving into the cloud. So the cloud, as we will see in this talk, changes everything. If you are thinking about a commercial open source business, you have to find out how there is a free piece of software, the open source software provided under an open source license, and how complementary to that there is a commercial product that customers pay for. On the right, you see at a high level how I explain to my students what it is that customers buy. And you can see there is a lot beyond the core software that's valuable to customers and that they pay for. Customers want the basic software under a commercial license. They want additional functionality. They want various guarantees, fitness for use, indemnification, and they want training and consulting, making the product a whole product rather than a bare bones project. And of course, they may also want that you operate your open source software for them, which makes you a cloud service or cloud computing provider. What the community or what people are not doing for you is to develop the product. So you have to do that yourself. And then you may ask, well, if all the cost of developing the software and providing a product is with me, why even go open source? And the old original but still valid answer is to drive adoption. of your product in a market. The frictionless or nearly frictionless distribution you achieve by making your software available as open source cannot be beat easily. And then once you have a large user base, not paying, but a user base, then you can benefit from that. How to benefit from user innovation and all of that is a different talk. Here I will focus on what I consider the main product management challenge of commercial open source, then in the cloud, which is how to maximize conversion of those users who don't pay to paying customers, while benefiting from the user community, so getting all the good that comes from being open source. And at the same time, avoiding that your competition picks up your software and competes with you. So let's look at this in detail. How to make people, for those where this is possible, upgrade from the free version to the paid for version. To understand that challenge, I classify the features or the functionality of your software, of your product, into three categories. There's the non-differentiating stuff that everyone has and nobody cares about it except that it has to be there and work well, but it's not a reason for anything. Then there is the reason to use your software because it's a good software, so it's functionality that users come for. And then beyond reason to use, there are additional features that are a reason to buy, which means to go from reason to use, from use to buy. And you can look at this in this stacked way, where the key now becomes, how do you make it distinction? How do you differentiate what is a reason to use that is available for free and the reason to buy features? So you have to withhold something. What is that? How could that be? And the key answer, or one of the answers, is usually IP modularity. IP modularity is a concept where you split intellectual property that you earn rent from. You split intellectual property into two or more parts and license them out under different licenses. In general, this is just two separate components. In the open source world, there's a specific variant of intellectual property modularity, which is called the open core model. And the open core model has component one under an open source license called the open core. And then it has additional software under a commercial license only, which extends that core. So open core is software, open core software is software, where the core is free, but extensions are only available for pay. And you might imagine actually that this is annoying to people who think everything is for free, which exactly, of course, is the challenge we are talking about, how to convince users that some things cannot be free and how to convince them to pay for it. So here's one way of looking at it. You can look at it along the line of pure software features, and then you're using the open core model and you're withholding, for example, enterprise readiness features, meaning advanced functionality like particular encryption algorithms or authentication and authorization as companies need it. And that can work if the non-paying users are kind of consumers, and as soon as the users are companies where they want these additional enterprise features, they are then willing to pay for it because companies are willing to pay for it. However, if you cannot make this clean distinction between, say, consumer and enterprise, and it's only enterprise and enterprise for free and to pay for, or consumer and consumer for free and to pay for, these folks will be annoyed that you're withholding software, the extensions to the open core from them. It is better then to have true IP modularity, where the complement, the other software that you don't make available for free, is really completely separate. And that could be going from the application domain, what is the business value of the software, to a technical domain, hosting that software in the cloud at scale. So you can complement a fabulous enterprise software, which you make available for free, nothing withheld. You can complement that with operations in your own cloud and withhold the software to manage at scale your software. And that is also a complement, and that is a reason to buy for customers, because they want you to host the software for them, assuming you can do so better, at higher quality, and cheaper than they could themselves. And this is how commercial open source is playing out these days. Everyone, nearly everyone, if they can at all, are moving into the cloud, which is where commercial open source met their worst enemy yet, the hyperscalers. So the other part of the product management challenge is, how do you avoid someone takes your software as open source and competes with you? As everything's moving into the cloud, you find there AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, hyperscalers who are really adept, really good at providing and operating software, whatever it may be, providing software at scale, cheaply, effectively, securely. That's a lot of capabilities you need to have. And that's a challenge for you, because you have that business software or something that has business value somehow, and you understand that. And understanding high reliable cloud operations for that is a completely different dimension. This is capabilities you have to acquire first. So AWS, Azure Cloud, Google Cloud, they all threaten to pick up those fabulous commercial open source projects and provide them better, faster, cheaper than the original vendor, because as hyperscalers, they are so much better at running cloud operations. And that's where we saw the recent changes, license changes, where MongoDB, for example, changed its core license to a so-called source available license, which basically says, if you want to compete with us, you're not allowed to do this with our software. Ta-da! A very straightforward and clean solution. As a consequence, MongoDB is not open source software any longer. That may or may not be a problem for them. It certainly was annoying for the community, but it's a clearly understandable business decision, and MongoDB is not open source any longer. Now, all of this is playing out as we speak. We are in the midst of it. In my research, I look at how these companies work. I travel to the Silicon Valley. I live in Germany, but I travel to the Silicon Valley. I interview people. We are developing this commercial open source playbook on the best practices of getting these business models to work. I then give that, right now mostly in person myself, but hopefully soon as a written book, to my startups, which are coming out of our research. And you can see here how much time really is paid for by the German government through various funds. Even as you already are a startup, you can still acquire €1 million or more to basically replacing seed funding well into a Series A. So it's very lucrative. It's a very good place to be in Germany and be a software startup. Here's an example. Right now, I'm the chief scientist of Additive, a document editing service. You can edit documents based on the collaboration model that we all know from GitHub. So everyone has their own copy, and you integrate work by sending merge requests, forking, sending merge requests, and so forth. So it works very nicely. That's it from me. Thank you very much. And I will stop here and we'll be happy now to take your questions.